Welcome to the Room of Opinions podcast. Today's episode isn't about gossip, headlines, or nostalgia. It's about power and what happens when power disguises itself as care. We're talking about Britney Spears not as a pop icon, not as a tabloid character, but as a case study in how modern fame, media, and legal systems intersect, and sometimes fail catastrophically. This isn't a rise and fall episode. This is a conversation. Because Britney's story doesn't end neatly, and it shouldn't. Part 1. Why Britney Still Matters. There's a temptation to treat Britney Spears as a story from the past, early 2000s, trashy tabloids, a different media era. But that's a mistake, because the structures that surrounded Britney, the incentives, the power imbalances, the appetite for spectacle didn't disappear. They just got quieter, more polite, better at pretending. Britney matters because she exposes something uncomfortable, how easily we accept extreme control when it's framed as protection. One of the most persistent arguments in this story is that the conservatorship saved Britney, that without it, things would have been worse. But here's the question nobody asks often enough. Saved her for who? Because under the conservatorship, Britney worked. She toured, she performed residencies, she generated enormous revenue. This wasn't a woman removed from public life to recover quietly. This was a woman operating at full commercial capacity while being legally stripped of autonomy. And that contradiction should have set off alarms immediately. Instead, it was normalized. Let's slow down on this point, because it's crucial. In most areas of life, productivity is evidence of competence. If you can work consistently, meet obligations, and perform at a high level, society assumes you're capable of managing your affairs. But Britney existed in a parallel logic. She was capable enough to work, but not capable enough to decide. Capable enough to earn, but not capable enough to control. Capable enough to perform, but not capable enough to consent fully. That's not protection. That's compartmentalization. Another uncomfortable truth. The media didn't miss the signs. They ignored them, because asking hard questions would have required slowing the machine, and Britney was a reliable engine of content. Every public appearance, every perceived misstep, every awkward moment, the press didn't just report on her instability, they produced it, and then framed themselves as concerned observers. That cycle never really ended. One of the most disturbing aspects of the conservatorship is how soft the language around it was. Words like care, support, safety, structure. But control doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it looks organized. Sometimes it looks legal. Sometimes it looks calm. And that's why it's harder to question. When Britney finally spoke directly to the court, what shocked people wasn't just what she said, it was how clearly she said it. This wasn't incoherence. This wasn't confusion. It was anger that had been waiting years for a microphone. The Free Britney movement didn't begin because fans suddenly became experts in law. It began because something didn't feel right, because people noticed the disconnect between Britney's workload and her lack of agency. And for the first time, public suspicion outweighed institutional authority. That's rare. And it's worth remembering that this shift didn't come from within the system. It came from outside pressure, which should concern all of us. When the conservatorship ended, there was an expectation, unspoken, but very real, that Britney would return to normal, to a version of herself that made sense to the public. But trauma doesn't resolve on a schedule, and freedom doesn't come with instructions. Her social media presence became raw, unfiltered, sometimes uncomfortable, and suddenly, people who had demanded her freedom began questioning whether she should have it. That tells you everything. So let's ask the question honestly. Was the conservatorship ever about protection, or was it about control that became convenient? Because protection is temporary, protection evolves. Protection aims to restore autonomy. Control stabilizes itself. Control resists scrutiny. Control becomes invisible, and once it's invisible, it feels justified. Britney's story forces us to confront something unsettling. We are far more comfortable with control than we admit, as long as it looks tidy, as long as the person being controlled continues to perform. as long as the outcome benefits us. And the moment that person stops performing comfort, we call it instability. This isn't a comeback story, and it's not a tragedy with a clean ending. It's an ongoing reckoning. Britney Spears didn't just survive fame. She survived a system that decided it knew better than she did for far too long. And the most important part of her story isn't whether she's okay now, it's whether we've actually learned anything. Because if we haven't, then this will happen again, just with someone else. If you've made it this far, thanks for listening. This has been the Room of Opinions podcast, and I'm genuinely interested. Do you believe the conservatorship was ever about protection, or was control the point all along? Let me know.